In the year 2347, humanity had spread far beyond Earth. They lived on planets circling distant stars, built cities on moons, and traveled between solar systems like people once drove between towns. All these human worlds were part of something called the Terran Concord, a peaceful alliance that valued knowledge, cooperation, and exploration above all else. War was rare. Most conflicts were solved with words, not weapons. The Concord believed that the galaxy was vast enough for everyone, and that understanding, not fear, should guide first contact with new life. Deep in the Krellis expanse, a quiet region of space long thought empty, the Concord's long-range listening posts picked up a strange signal. It wasn't natural. It pulsed in patterns too regular to be cosmic noise. Scientists on Luna Station spent weeks analyzing it. They concluded it was artificial, intelligent, and likely coming from a species that had not yet developed faster than light travel. That made them perfect for peaceful first contact. The Concord had strict rules. Never interfere with pre-warp civilizations unless invited. But if a species was close to making that leap, gentle guidance was allowed. Captain Daniel Brooks was chosen to lead the mission. He wasn't a soldier. He was a diplomat, calm and thoughtful, with a reputation for patience. He had helped negotiate peace between two feuding asteroid colonies, and once spent 6 months learning the mating calls of an amphibious species just to earn their trust. His ship, the Odyssey, was small and unarmed, just a science vessel with a crew of 12 and enough supplies for a year-long journey. With him was Lisa Morgan, a xenolinguist known for her sharp mind and quiet courage. She had grown up on a farming colony in the Proxima system, where she learned to read animal behavior before she could read books. That skill translated well to alien languages. She saw patterns where others saw chaos. On the trip to Krellis, she spent most of her time studying the signal, trying to find meaning in its rhythm. She believed the beings behind it were curious, not hostile. When the Odyssey dropped out of warp near the source, a small, rocky planet orbiting a dim red star, everything seemed calm. The planet had a thin atmosphere, just enough to support life. Scans showed clusters of organic-looking structures near geothermal vents. No weapons, no warships, no signs of spaceflight at all. Daniel ordered a standard approach, slow, visible, and non-threatening. The Odyssey hovered a few kilometers above the largest settlement, broadcasting a universal greeting sequence, a mix of math, music, and light patterns designed to say, "We come in peace." For a full day, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the ground beneath the settlement split open. Dozens of sleek biomechanical ships rose into the sky. They looked like living things, smooth, segmented, covered in shifting membranes that pulsed with faint light. They moved fast, faster than anything human engineers had built. Before Daniel could issue a retreat order, the Vrathi opened fire. Their weapons weren't lasers or missiles. They fired concentrated beams of sonic energy that vibrated at frequencies designed to shatter metal and scramble electronics. The Odyssey's hull groaned. Lights flickered. Alarms blared. One engine failed. Then another. Evasive maneuvers, Daniel shouted, gripping his chair as the ship lurched sideways. Lisa was already at the comm station trying to send a distress call. "They're jamming all channels," she said, her voice tight. "No signal getting out." The Vrathi ship circled like predators. They didn't speak, didn't warn, didn't ask questions. They simply attacked with cold, mechanical precision. Daniel made a hard choice. "Abandon ship," he said. "All hands to the escape pods." The crew scrambled. 6 pods launched into the thin atmosphere. But the Vrathi were ready. 2 pods were vaporized mid-air. Another crashed into a canyon. Only 3 made it to the surface intact. Daniel and Lisa were in the same pod. It landed hard, rolling down a rocky slope before coming to a stop. They crawled out, bruised but alive. The sky above was filled with Vrathi ships. No human vessel remained. Then, from the shadows of the canyon, figures emerged. Tall, reptilian, with scales that shimmered like oil on water. Their eyes were black and lidless. They carried weapons that looked grown, not built. Organic tubes that hummed with stored energy. Lisa raised her hands slowly. "We mean no harm," she said, even though she knew they couldn't understand her. One of the Vrathi stepped forward. It made a clicking sound deep in its throat. Then it pointed its weapon, not at Daniel but at Lisa. Before Daniel could react, a net of glowing filaments shot out and wrapped around her. She cried out as it tightened, lifting her off the ground. The Vrathi dragged her away without a word. Daniel tried to follow, but two more Vrathi aimed their weapons at him. He froze. They didn't kill him. They just watched, motionless, as their ships returned to the sky. Alone on the alien world, Daniel activated his emergency beacon. It was weak, but maybe, just maybe, someone would hear it. Back on Earth, the news came 3 weeks later. The Odyssey was gone. Only fragmented data survived, enough to show the attack, the escape, and Lisa's capture. The footage of her being taken spread fast. People watched her face, fearful but determined, as she vanished into the Vrathi ship. The Terran Concord held an emergency session. Scientists argued the Vrathi might have misunderstood human intentions. Diplomats urged caution. But the public wasn't listening. They saw an unprovoked attack. They saw one of their own dragged away like an animal, and they were angry. Not the kind of anger that shouts, the kind that goes quiet, the kind that plans. Daniel Brooks was rescued a month later by a Concord recovery team. He gave his full report. He described the Vrathi as intelligent, organized, and utterly merciless. They didn't see us as equals, he told the council. They saw us as pests, or prey. His words echoed across human space. For the first time in generations, the Concord faced a question it had long avoided. What do you do when peace is not an option? No one had an answer yet. But deep in military shipyards, engines were being tested. In labs, new weapons were being designed. And in homes from Mars to Alpha Centauri, people looked up at the stars and wondered how long it would take before humanity stopped asking for peace and started demanding justice. The galaxy had just met a new kind of human. Not the explorer, not the diplomat, but the one who remembers and never forgets. News of the attack on the Odyssey and the capture of Lisa Morgan spread faster than any signal could travel. It wasn't just data, it was emotion. People across human colonies watched the grainy footage of Lisa being dragged away by the Vrathi, her face pale but steady, her eyes locked on the camera until she vanished into their ship. That image became a symbol, not of fear but of defiance, and it lit a fire in hearts that had grown used to peace. On Earth, in the glass towers of the Concord Council, leaders argued late into the night. Some, like Ambassador Helen Cho, insisted this was a tragic misunderstanding. We appeared without warning, she said. To a species that has never seen space travelers. We might have seemed like invaders. Others nodded. Reminding the room of the Prime Accord, the ancient rule that forbade military action against pre-warp civilizations unless they posed a clear, ongoing threat, but General Nora Price saw it differently. She stood at the council chamber's center, her uniform crisp, her voice low but sharp. They didn't just attack a ship, she said. They captured a scientist. They broadcast her interrogation across open channels. They used neural probes to tear secrets from her mind while she was still awake. She paused, letting the silence sink in. This wasn't defense. This was cruelty. And cruelty like that doesn't come from fear. It comes from arrogance. The council reviewed the Vrathi transmission. It showed Lisa strapped to a chair made of living tissue, wires burrowing into her temples. Her body shook, but she never screamed. Instead, she whispered human nursery rhymes, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," over and over as if to remind herself who she was. The Vrathi recorded everything, then sent it out like a message. This is what happens to those who come near us. That changed everything. Public opinion turned hard and fast. Protests erupted, not for peace but for action. On Mars, workers walked off fusion plants holding signs that read, "Bring Lisa home." On Titan, students painted the Vrathi symbol on walls and set it on fire. Even on quiet farming worlds like New Kansas, families gathered in town squares not to pray but to demand justice. Admiral Carl Dawson, head of Concord Strategic Command, called an emergency war council. He was a man who had spent his life avoiding war, believing humanity's strength lay in its ability to talk, not fight. But now, looking at the faces around the table, some young, some old, all shaken, he knew the old rules no longer fit. "We have 3 choices," he said. "Do nothing and hope they leave us alone. Send a diplomatic team and risk another massacre, or respond with force so overwhelming that they never dare touch a human again." No one spoke for a long time. Then General Price leaned forward. "They think we're soft, that we'll forgive because we're civilized. But civilization isn't weakness. It's the choice to be kind until kindness gets your people hurt. Then it's our duty to be something else. The vote was close, but it passed. By a margin of 1, the Concord authorized military action. Not just rescue. Not just defense. Full neutralization of the Vrathi threat. The operation was given a name, Silent Requiem. It meant a quiet end. No fanfare. No warnings. Just silence where the Vrathi once were. Within hours, shipyards across human space came alive. Drones swarmed over dormant warships, installing new weapons, upgrading shields, syncing navigation to quantum entanglement relays that allowed near-instant communication across light years. Factories that once made solar panels now forged plasma cores. Schools paused lessons to train medics and engineers for deployment. Captain Daniel Brooks, still recovering from his ordeal, was summoned to Luna Command. He expected to be debriefed again. Instead, Admiral Dawson handed him a new uniform. "You know them," the Admiral said. "You saw how they move, how they think. We need you leading the front." Daniel hesitated. "I'm not a soldier." "You're the only one who's faced them and lived," Dawson replied. "And Lisa trusted you. That means something." Meanwhile, deep in a secure medical bay on Europa, Lisa Morgan lay in a recovery pod. She had been rescued during a daring raid by Concord scouts who tracked the Vrathi signal back to a hidden orbital station. She was weak, her mind scarred by the neural probes, but alive. Doctors said she might never speak again. But on the third night, she woke up and whispered one word: "Brooks." They brought Daniel to her. She couldn't sit up, but she gripped his hand with surprising strength. "They're not just warriors," she said, her voice hoarse. "They're hive-minded. Their leaders control everything through sound pulses. Break the signal and the rest fall apart." That information became the key. Human scientists worked day and night to design a counter-frequency, a sonic weapon that could mimic the Vrathi command tone and send false orders through their network. It wouldn't kill them directly. It would make them turn on each other. General Price approved the plan immediately. "Let them destroy themselves," she said. "Then we clean up what's left." As fleets assembled near the edge of known space, morale was high. Not because soldiers wanted war, but because they believed in protecting what humanity had built. They weren't fighting for conquest. They were fighting so no human child would ever be taken from their home and used as a tool. On the eve of departure, Daniel stood on the observation deck of the flagship Vanguard, looking out at the stars. He thought of Lisa, still healing. He thought of the crew he lost. And he thought of the Vrathi, cold, silent, certain of their own power. He didn't feel anger. He felt responsibility because now humanity had made its choice. They would not beg for peace. They would enforce it. And if the Vrathi refused to live in a galaxy that included humans, then the galaxy would have to choose, and it already had. The first wave of ships jumped to warp before dawn. Their destination, the Krellis system. Their mission, make sure no one ever hurts a human like that again. The Concord had spoken. The humans were coming. And this time they weren't asking for permission. The human fleet moved like a shadow through the stars. No fanfare, no broadcasts, just hundreds of warships slipping out of warp near the edge of Vrathi space, engines running silent, shields tuned to absorb rather than reflect. They were not here to talk. They were here to end something. Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his eyes fixed on the main display. Before him hung a star map dotted with red markers, Vrathi outposts, communication hubs, and bioforges where their living ships were grown. Beside him stood Lieutenant Ryan Cole, a young tactical officer with a mind like a steel trap. He had designed the battle plan using Lisa Morgan's notes and weeks of signal analysis. "They think in pulses," Ryan had explained. "One central hive mind on their homeworld sends commands through low-frequency sound waves. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon obeys without question." That was their weakness. The first strike hit at dawn on the Vrathi calendar, a concept humans had decoded from their signal patterns. Human stealth drones, no bigger than birds, slipped into the atmosphere of Vrathis Prime, the enemy's central world. They carried sonic emitters tuned to mimic the command frequency. At exactly 0600 local time, they activated. Chaos erupted. Vrathi warships hovering over cities suddenly turned on each other, firing without warning. Ground troops fired into their own ranks. Bioforges collapsed as internal systems received conflicting orders. Grow armor, then dissolve it. Build weapons, then melt them down. The hive mind screamed in confusion, but the false signal drowned it out. Within minutes, the entire Vrathi defense network tore itself apart. From orbit, Daniel watched the planet's surface flicker with fire. "It's working," Ryan said, his voice tight with disbelief. "Don't celebrate yet," Daniel replied. "This is just the beginning." The main fleet moved in. Human ships, sleek and black, dropped from the void like hawks. Their weapons were not the crude explosives of old wars. They fired gravity lances that bent space itself, crushing Vrathi structures into dust without a single explosion. They launched nanite swarms that ate through biometal but left rock and soil untouched. Every shot was precise. Every move calculated. This was not rage. This was discipline. On the second day, human Marines landed on 3 key moons orbiting Vrathis Prime. Their mission: destroy the neural relay towers that amplified the hive mind signal across the system. The towers were tall, pulsing things made of bone and crystal, humming with energy. The Marines moved fast, planting shaped charges at the base of each one. When the towers fell, the last threads of Vrathi coordination snapped. Isolated and confused, the remaining Vrathi forces fought harder, but without unity, they were just animals in a cage. Human fighters picked them off one by one. No mercy, no prisoners. The order from General Price was clear: leave nothing that can rebuild. Back on the Vanguard, Daniel received a message from Admiral Dawson. "The Conquered Council is watching," it read. "Show them we are not monsters. Show them we are just final." Daniel understood. This war wasn't just about Lisa. It wasn't even just about revenge. It was about sending a message to every species in the galaxy. Hurt humans and you will not be reasoned with. You will be removed. By the end of the first week, the outer colonies of the Vrathi were silent. No signals. No movement. Scans showed cities empty, ships drifting dead in orbit. Human cleanup crews moved in not to loot but to erase. They melted down Vrathi tech in plasma furnaces. They buried ruins under kilometers of rock. They scrubbed every data core, every carving, every trace of the species from existence. Ryan asked Daniel once, "Do you ever wonder if they had families? Children?" Daniel looked at him for a long time. "They showed us what they were when they took Lisa," he said. "They chose cruelty. We're just honoring that choice." The homeworld fell on day 12. Human ships formed a ring around Vrathis Prime and unleashed a new weapon, developed in secret during the peace years. It didn't burn the planet. It didn't crack the crust. It sent a pulse through the atmosphere that disrupted all neural activity in Vrathi biology. One moment the surface teemed with life. The next it was still. Not dead in a bloody way, just quiet, like a switch had been turned off. No screams. No explosions. Just silence. Daniel ordered a final sweep. Drones scanned every cave, every bunker, every possible hiding place. Nothing. The Vrathi were gone. In the command center, General Price appeared on the main screen. Her face was calm, but her eyes shone with something like relief. "Operation Silent Requiem is complete," she announced. "The Vrathi threat has been neutralized." There was no cheering on the bridge, only quiet nods. The crew had done what they were asked. They had protected humanity, but the weight of what they'd done settled over them like cold fog. Later, alone in his quarters, Daniel replayed the footage of Lisa being taken. Then he watched the last scan of Vrathis Prime, empty, peaceful, clean. He wondered if this was justice, or something else, but he knew one thing for sure. The galaxy would remember this. Not because humans shouted, but because they acted, and when they decided something should not exist, it didn't. The fleet turned for home. Behind them, the Krelly system held its breath. Ahead, a new era began, one where humanity was no longer just another voice in the dark. They were the silence that followed the storm. The victory felt hollow. Back on Earth, crowds cheered in the streets. Statues of General Nora Price were already being planned. Songs were written about the Great Cleansing. Children played war games with toy ships, pretending to wipe out the Vrathi just like the heroes on the news. But in the quiet places, the hospitals, the command centers, the homes of those who had lost someone, the mood was different. Lisa Morgan sat by a window in her recovery suite on Europa, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her body was healing, but her mind still flinched at sudden sounds. She had watched the final broadcast from Vrathis Prime, the silent planet, the empty cities, the official Concord statement declaring the Vrathi erased from galactic memory. It made her sick. She remembered the Vrathi not as monsters, but as beings who made a choice. A terrible one, but still a choice. And now, humanity had made its own. When Admiral Carl Dawson came to visit, she didn't greet him with thanks. She looked him in the eye and said, "You didn't just stop them. You wiped them out. Every last one. Even the young. Even the ones who never fired a shot." Dawson sat slowly. "They were part of a hive," he said. "There were no innocents. Their biology tied them all to the same will." "But what if there were?" Lisa asked. "What if somewhere deep underground a child was born who didn't hear the hive call? What if they could have been different?" Dawson had no answer. Meanwhile, reports began trickling in from the outer colonies. Human crews tasked with sanitizing Vrathi sites weren't just destroying weapons. They were melting down art, burning records, even grinding ancient bones into dust. One officer on the cleanup team, a young man named Eli Grant, refused to destroy a Vrathi nursery he found buried beneath a collapsed dome. Inside were small sleeping pods, empty but intact. He called it a crime against memory. He was relieved of duty the next day. Captain Daniel Brooks heard about it. He said nothing publicly, but in private logs he wrote, "We swore we'd never become what we fought. But when you erase a species, you don't just kill bodies. You kill their story. And that's a kind of murder, too." General Price dismissed the concerns. In a speech to the conquered Senate, she stood tall and said, "Mercy is a luxury for peacetime. We were not at peace. We were at war with a species that saw us as less than animals. They chose cruelty. We chose survival. And if survival means leaving no trace of those who would destroy us, then so be it." The Senate applauded. The public agreed, but not everyone. On Mars, a group of historians formed a secret archive. They collected every scrap of Vrathi data they could find. Fragments of signal logs, sensor readings, even pieces of wreckage smuggled off cleanup ships. They stored it in encrypted vaults beneath the Valles Marineris Canyon, labeling it Project Echo. Their goal wasn't to bring the Vrathi back. It was to make sure someone remembered they existed. Lisa Morgan heard about the archive. She sent a single message: "Keep it safe." Back on the Vanguard, now docked at Luna Station, Daniel walked the empty halls. Most of the crew had been reassigned or granted leave. Only a skeleton team remained. He passed the memorial wall where names of the fallen from the Odyssey were etched in steel. He stopped at Lisa's name, still there even though she had survived. He hadn't asked for it to be removed. He thought about the war. It had been clean, efficient. No human lives lost in the final campaign. But something had been lost anyway. A piece of what made humanity human. Ryan Cole found him there. The young lieutenant looked older than his years. "Do you think we went too far?" he asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at the stars through the observation port. "I think we did what we believed was right," he said finally. "But belief doesn't always equal truth." News came that the Conquered was drafting a new law, the Human Restraint Accord. It would require a 3/4 vote from the full Senate to authorize total species neutralization in the future. Some called it unnecessary. Others called it too little, too late. Lisa, now strong enough to travel, requested a meeting with the full council. She stood before them not in a uniform but in simple clothes. She spoke softly, but every word carried. "They hurt me," she said. "They tried to break me, but erasing them doesn't heal me. It just makes us something new. Something colder." She paused. "We won. But if winning means becoming like them, certain, merciless, absolute, then what did we really save?" No one clapped, but no one argued either. That night, Daniel visited her. They sat in silence for a long time. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "I regret that it had to happen," she said. "But I don't regret surviving." He nodded. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, the official story hardened. The Vrathi were declared a myth, a cautionary tale told to new cadets. Never provoke humans, instructors would say, because the last species that did vanished. But in hidden corners and whispered conversations, in locked data drives and quiet minds, the truth remained. Humanity had won the war, but they had also lost something they might never get back. And the galaxy, watching from the dark, understood one thing clearly. Cross humans, and you might not just lose your war, you might lose your place in history itself. By the year 2350, the Vrathi were gone, not just defeated but deleted. Their name was scrubbed from official records. Their language was removed from xenolinguistic databases. Even old science papers that mentioned their signal were quietly archived and locked behind security codes. The Terran Conquered issued a formal statement that read, "No evidence confirms the existence of a species known as the Vrathi. All related data is considered corrupted or fictional." It was as if they had never been. On Earth, life returned to normal. Children went to school. Farmers harvested crops on distant worlds. Ships carried cargo between stars without fear. The war was over and most people were glad to forget it, but forgetting is not the same as healing. Captain Daniel Brooks left the conquered Navy. He turned down medals, interviews, and a teaching post at the Luna Academy. Instead, he bought a small plot of land on a quiet moon orbiting a nameless star. There, he built a cabin with his own hands, planted fruit trees, and spent his days watching the sky. He never spoke about the war. When visitors asked what he did before, he just said, "I used to fix things." Lisa Morgan never returned to xenolinguistics. She moved to a coastal town on New Oregon, where the sound of waves drowned out the silence in her head. She opened a small school for children of refugees and orphans, teaching them stories, not of war, but of kindness, curiosity, and listening. She never mentioned the Vrathi, but sometimes late at night she would write in a private journal. No one ever read it. General Nora Price became a legend. Statues of her stood in city squares. Her face was on recruitment posters. She gave speeches about strength, unity, and the price of peace. But in private, those who knew her said she grew quieter with time. She stopped attending victory celebrations. Once, a young officer asked her if she ever had doubts. She looked out the window for a long time before answering. "Doubt doesn't win wars," she said, "but maybe it keeps you human after they're over." The Human Restraint Accord passed with wide support. It required overwhelming consensus before any future action of total neutralization could be approved. Some called it wisdom. Others called it weakness. But it was there, a line drawn in the sand saying, "Never again like this." Yet the galaxy had changed. Alien species that once ignored human messages now responded quickly. Trade negotiations that used to take years were settled in weeks. When a pirate fleet attacked a human freighter near the Orion Rim, 3 nearby non-human governments sent patrols to help before the Concorde even asked. They weren't being kind. They were being careful because everyone had heard the story. Not the official one, the quiet one. The one passed between starship crews over drinks or whispered by diplomats in back corridors. The story of a species that made humans angry. And how in less than a year that species simply stopped existing. No ruins, no survivors, no trace. It wasn't fear of human weapons that kept the peace now. It was fear of human silence. On a remote research station near the edge of known space, a young scientist named Maya Ruiz found something strange. Buried in old sensor logs from the Krellis expanse was a faint echo, a single pulse repeating every 73 hours. It matched no known natural phenomenon, and it carried a pattern eerily similar to the original Vrathi signal. She reported it to her supervisor, who told her to delete it. "That data is contaminated," he said. Best not to look, but Maya saved a copy. Just in case, she didn't tell anyone, not yet. But she wondered, what if something survived? Not a threat, just a memory. A whisper from a species the galaxy was told never existed. Would humanity listen this time? Or would they erase the whisper too? Back on Daniel's moon, the fruit trees bore their first harvest. He sat on his porch, peeling an apple, watching 2 birds chase each other through the sky. He thought about Lisa, about the crew he lost, about the faces of the Vrathi he saw in the canyon. He didn't hate them anymore. He didn't forgive them either. He just carried them like stones in his pocket. Peace, he realized, wasn't the absence of war. It was the choice to remember, without letting memory turn into poison. In the conquered Senate, a new generation of leaders rose. They spoke less of conquest and more of connection. They funded deep space listening posts not to find enemies but to find friends. They reopened old cultural exchange programs. Slowly, carefully, humanity began to reach out again. But this time they did it with open hands and watchful eyes, because the lesson of the Vrathi was not just about anger. It was about consequence, and the galaxy learned it well. Years later, when new species made first contact with humans, they always asked one question: "Are you the ones who erased the Vrathi?" The human ambassador would smile gently and say, We are the ones who protect what matters. And that was enough. No one dared test that promise. In the end, humanity didn't need to shout to be heard. They had proven once and for all that their silence could be louder than any war cry. And so, the stars remained quiet. Not out of fear, but out of respect. For the last species that made humans angry was gone, and no one wanted to be the next.